Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the R2E2 Playbook launch. I invite you all to share your name, organization, and location in the chat or anything else you want to share about yourselves, and to engage in discussion there throughout the webinar. So please go ahead and introduce yourselves. We are so glad that you're here. Next slide. My name is Annika Brindle, and I'm the Director of Residential Retrofits for Energy Equity, or R2E2 for short. The R2E2 team members have all poured heart and soul into developing this resource that aligns with our values and vision for high quality, community-driven energy upgrade programs for affordable housing. R2E2 is a partnership of ACEEE, Elevate Emerald Cities Collaborative, and HRNA Advisors. Next slide. R2E2 supports communities and program administrators with technical assistance to help ensure that the current influx of federal funding for energy upgrades flows to the frontline and disadvantaged communities that need it most. We encourage the creation and scaling of programs that do more than just lower bills and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also improve health, create local jobs, and help advance racial equity. Next slide. Today, you'll hear from the project lead for the R2E2 Playbook, Ian Becker, as well as from staff working on 3 of the program examples that we highlight for employing best practices. We are joined today by Claire Olekshak, Executive Director with Sustain Dane, Simon Mugo, Program Manager with the New York City Accelerator, and Marty Jostin, Principal Director for Building Decarbonization at New Ecology. Next slide. After hearing from our speakers, we will have time for Q&A. Next slide. First, some brief housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar and we'll be making it available to all registrants within a few business days. To ask a question during the webinar, please submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can upvote questions in the Q&A box that you would like us to prioritize. And please use the chat to engage in respectful and productive discussion with other participants. We have a few additional requests for you today. Please be mindful of sharing space and remember that we all have something to learn from one another. We ask that you adhere to our code of conduct. R2E2 will not tolerate behaviors that cause harm or disrupt the learning environment. Please direct message Stephanie Sosa Coulter. If you feel unsafe in this space, disruptive participants may be removed. Thank you for helping to create a positive learning environment for everyone here today. Next slide. So I think Ian's getting on camera now. And in a second here, I will turn things over to him as our first speaker. Ian Becker is a manager with residential retrofits for energy equity at ACEEE. He conducts research and manages projects, provides technical assistance related to federal funding opportunities, and otherwise helps local governments and other stakeholders develop programs to improve the energy efficiency of affordable housing. Ian, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today for the launch of this resource. We put a lot of work into this, and we're really excited to share it with you. To begin, it may be helpful to take a step back and think about the problem that we're trying to address with this resource. Next slide, please. So as Annika mentioned, our initiative wants to encourage the creation and scaling of building upgrade programs that go beyond the status quo. We think programs should be community-led, easy to use, and achieve lower energy bills in addition to greenhouse gas emission reductions, racial and social equity, improved health outcomes, and local economic development. Because as we know, the status quo is not great. Too many low and moderate income households have not reaped the benefits of past energy efficiency efforts. For instance, 67% of low-income households face a high energy burden because they spend more than 6% of their income on energy bills. Of this subset of households, 60% actually face a severe energy burden, which is when a household spends more than 10% of its income on energy bills. And while roughly 27.5% of all US households have low incomes, these households receive only about 13% of spending from existing energy efficiency programs administered by utilities. So it's clear that new approaches are needed, and R2E2 believes that community-driven planning can really help reimagine how we design and implement solutions. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the playbook. What you're seeing right now is a screenshot of the landing page of R2E2playbook.org. The playbook is designed as a tool to help program administrators or other stakeholders establish, improve, or expand building energy upgrade programs for low and moderate income housing in their communities. This resource contains recommendations that apply, importantly, to both subsidized and unsubsidized housing. So how does it work? Well, it's organized into 3 sections. Section 1 is called Planning an Equitable Engagement Process. Section 2 is called Identifying Your Community Upgrade Priorities. And Section 3 is called Crafting a Well-Designed and Equitable Program. And each of these sections provides foundational information related to building energy upgrades, and then is followed by 12 actions that R2E2 recommends program administrators take. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see the 12 actions that the playbook recommends. In this resource, each of these actions leads to more granular best practices, which are paired with relevant case studies and additional tools. And while these actions may seem broad at first glance, we've structured the resource to enable you to identify very specific approaches to taking these actions that may work well for your community or in your jurisdiction. So let's zoom in on how you can actually navigate the playbook and follow that process. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you're looking at the actions and best practices for Section 3, crafting a well-designed and equitable program. The first action in the section is Action 6, create an easy-to-use program intake, participation, and support process. This action leads to best practices, and you can see the first on this slide. This begins to show how our playbook leads you from more high-level recommendations to more specific approaches. One of our recommended actions is to create an easy-to-use program, and this page begins to operationalize that recommendation through our introduction of the concept of one-stop shops. So we think this program design is an ideal approach for braiding and stacking funding, which, as we all know, is very important these days, given the new federal funding influx that's on everyone's radar. But the playbook doesn't leave you there. As you'll see on the next slide, this best practice is paired with numerous case studies and related tools to provide critical context and guidance for administrators who want to ensure their programs follow these best practices. So on this slide, you can see the 2 case studies that we pair with this best practice. The first is Philadelphia's Built to Last program, which functions as a one-stop shop that uses a single application and a no wrong door approach to coordinating services and program eligibility across multiple agencies. The second case study that we highlight is the Energy Smart program in Boulder County, Colorado. This program pairs participants with what they call energy advisors that act as a single point of contact who can help identify the best upgrades and recommend contractors to program users. And so you can kind of see how this resource, you can learn about what the programs are, but also get ideas for approaches to take in your own communities. These 2 programs are both fantastic, and they use a lot of the best practices that we identify in the playbook. And if you'd like to learn more about either program, you can find a link to their websites in this section in the playbook. Next slide, please. And then in addition to highlighting many programs across the country, the playbook also presents tools and resources that may be helpful as you consider how to include these best practices in your own programs. So for instance, this slide shows the additional tools that we've included for Action 3, identify program focus areas. One of the best practices for taking this action is to use community data and community priorities and establish clear racial equity, housing, workforce development, health, and environmental justice goals for both engagement activities and program outcomes. As you can see on this slide, the playbook leads you to numerous tools that can be helpful in setting these particular goals. The additional tools we highlight in this instance include a guide from Emerald Cities Collaborative on incorporating workforce development into climate-related planning processes, NREL's Comstock and ResStock tools to model the impacts of building technologies in different communities, and numerous other tools from federal agencies to help administrators make data-driven decisions related to energy goals and program planning. Next slide, please. So these are just a few examples of the great programs and tools that the playbook contains, but there's a lot more to delve into. The 12 actions are paired with over 40 best practices, which are themselves connected to over 90 case studies and over 120 resources and additional tools. So you can spend a lot of time with this resource during program planning, and we certainly hope that you do. Next slide, please. And as you navigate the playbook, if you have any questions or suggestions or would like to follow up with us for any reason, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can send a message via the Stay Informed tab on the R2E2 website. And that's it for me. Now we're going to hear more about 3 programs in the playbook from our guest speakers. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ian. I am so excited for folks to dig into this tool, especially those actions and best practices pages for each of the 3 sections, which is where folks will find the example programs employing best practices. The link, I believe, has been shared in the chat or will shortly be shared in the chat so that you can be poking around. Please submit your questions for Ian via the Q&A. Our next speaker is Claire Olekshak, Executive Director of Sustain Dane. Claire aims to accelerate a sustainable environment and economy that benefits all. She is passionate about innovation, collaboration, and social impact. Claire oversees programs focused on holistic sustainability, workshops for businesses and individuals, energy efficiency and affordable housing, food waste reduction, and more. Claire, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting us to join this panel, and thank you for putting together the overall booklet. It's been really exciting to see everything come together. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk today about the Efficiency Navigator program. This is a program in partnership with Sustain Dane and Elevate. We are focused in Dane County, which is the south central part of Wisconsin, also the county where Madison, Wisconsin, the capital, is located. Next slide, please. So the Efficiency Navigator program is focused on small to medium multifamily housing. This is, the 2 units, the 4 units, the 8 units. And these housing units have oftentimes been left out of efficiency programs and are very critical when we look at our affordable housing stock in the community. We're working to make the housing more efficient and resilient while also reducing the operating costs, which helps it remain affordable and resilient. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the data in our county, what we saw here, and this is maybe similar to many of your communities as well, is there are about 57,000 units, or 25% of the housing stock in Dane County was part of our target, the NOAA housing, naturally occurring affordable housing. And 67% of the available affordable housing is NOAA stock. So that means most of the affordable housing, which is based on the rent levels that we're looking at, is not subsidized, right? It's not part of affordable housing programs. It's these units that are spread throughout the community. Next slide, please. And that's why it was really important that we feel to target this area. So to make the Efficiency Navigator program work, this is a collaboration. So we have our nonprofits. There's energy analysis, though, that's going in here, and the contractors and the property owners. We have partnerships with the municipal governments. We're working with 3 right now in Dane County, and then also community partners. And each of our programs in the neighborhoods we worked in and the municipality we work with have involved community partners who on the ground are connected with the housing, with the property owners and the residents as well. Next slide. So the way this program works is we start with, I should say actually, before we even start with the outreach and the intake, we spent about a year bringing stakeholders together to design the program and took their feedback for what they needed to feel comfortable being a part of this program and where the gaps had been previously. So we start with an outreach and an intake process, being really thoughtful about engagement in the community, and then the ease of asking people to come in and to learn more, as well as to start sharing information about their property for how we can then move to a site assessment to get the data for that property. And when we put together the site assessment, we're looking at energy elements. We're also looking at health and safety. We have found a number of gas leaks through doing the assessment work, which we are fortunate our funding has been able to allow us to take care of. We're looking at electrification opportunities. And then we also are able to identify some of the other health and safety, asthma triggers or pests or other elements that may be present in the home. We put together a report, so look at the costs and savings per measures that could be possible, and then that helps us to prioritize where we want to go for contractor implementation. Currently, our program is able to cover 100% of the upgrades for the building, and we also support the technical assistance with the contractors, their management, their payment, and closeout. Next slide, please. So a real important part when working in each community is the eligibility, and how do we identify that we are using these resources in the best way for the most equitable approach and for those that are most going to benefit from the program. So what I put here is an example of how we try to communicate this, and I'll add some nuances as well. So for the buildings, we focus on renter-occupied buildings, not buildings where the owner is occupied. And that's to emphasize the split incentive dilemma. And where buildings where the renter is occupying it, it is oftentimes harder for those owners to make the investment around energy efficiency. We're focused on 2 units up to 12 units. So we are including duplexes, which our efficiency program, like our focus on energy program for the state, does not always include in commercial upgrades, but we felt it was important based on looking at the data for the community. We are not looking at programs that are part of a affordable housing subsidy program, although we do welcome buildings that are accepting Section 8 vouchers. People must be current on their property taxes, and then they have to be located in one of these communities. That's the municipal partner for the funding. To then further qualify a property, we look at the with the American Community Survey census data to identify tracts where 50% or more of the residents are at or below 80% of the area median income. And then we also look at the fair market rent values, and the building owner needs to be at or below that, as well as they need to commit to keeping their rent at or below the HUD level for 5 years post-implementation. And then, as I mentioned before, prioritization goes to buildings where the residents pay for utilities. Once we have, a number of assessments that have come in, we've kind of been able to look across the buildings, and that's so that the savings we know will go directly to those residents and most benefit them. Next slide, please. So typical recommendations that are funded: attic air sealing insulation, sidewall insulation. We have a lot of brick buildings, and the sidewall insulation has been a really important part of helping those buildings make them more comfortable and more energy efficiency. HVAC equipment and replacement, including air source heat pumps, as well as some of the water heater replacements as well. And then, as I mentioned, we have identified, it's probably up to, a dozen now, gas leaks that we've been able to also take care of as we do these assessments and these replacements or upgrades. Next slide. So I have 2 slides of some examples of buildings. The first one over here, you can see this one had about a 10-year cost savings, about $5,500. And this one was a kind of air sealing, a boiler replacement. There was some insulation as well as some equipment upgrades as well. The other building on the right, that one a little bit larger for the 10-year cost savings. That one also included bath fans. We are looking at ventilation across the whole buildings as well, as we're tightening up these buildings, and some additional water heater. And this was actually a tune-up. Can I have the next slide, please? These next 2 buildings were buildings that included electrification. The one on the left was moving from electric resistance heat to an air source heat pump system. So, complete electrification there. And then the one on the right was a dual fuel furnace system that we were able to put in to move towards more electric use for those. Also, air conditioning. I think it's important for me to mention these 2 both moved to more efficient air conditioning. They had the window units. We've also worked in buildings that had no air conditioning, and more extreme heat is one of the impacts of climate change that we're seeing in our community. So that's an important part of the consideration for our program for which buildings we work in. Next slide, please. And then this is a quote from one of our owners. The program helps families living paycheck to paycheck not only live a more comfortable life, but save money and energy. And with each dollar spent helping people, the more hope we have for a sustainable future. So I think this kind of really summarizes how, an owner that we've worked with and kind of their passion and their alignment on this work as well, which is just, one of the most rewarding parts of doing this work. We in total have worked with about 150 units across about 35 buildings right now. And then we have just launched this third community that I mentioned. So we'll continue to see that number grow. Next slide. All right, and this is my contact information. So with that, do you want me to answer questions, or are we gonna go to more speakers and then we'll answer them at the end?
We'll do questions at the end. Thank you
Okay,
so
great.
much, Claire.
Thanks,
But everyone,
everyone.
please be sure to share any questions you have for Claire using the Q&A function. Our next speaker is Simon Mugo, Program Manager for the NYC Accelerator. Simon has worked in program design and implementation capacity on utility and state-funded energy efficiency programs targeting residential, commercial, and industrial buildings in New York City. He has experience in the development and construction of large-scale ground mount and solar PV projects in cities across the United States. Simon, welcome.
Thanks, Annika, and thanks everyone. Appreciate ACEEE for having us and for putting together this event. Just by introduction, I'm Simon Mugo, and you can move to the next slide, please. Simon Mugo, I'm the program manager for the New York City Accelerator program, and the Accelerator is a program that was developed by the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. But just a quick distinction there. I am not an employee of the mayor's office. Rather, I'm an employee of ICF. We are a consulting firm and have been retained by the mayor's office to implement this program on behalf of the city. So with that, I can jump right into the presentation if you'd like to move to the next slide. So in order to understand the reason why the New York City Accelerator program was created, I think it's important to take a step back to understand the context of the city's landscape to better understand why the program was created. So in New York City, 70% of our emissions come from buildings, and by 2050, 90% of the buildings that exist today are expected to still be here during that time. So in addition to this, New York City is committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, which means that in order to achieve the carbon neutrality goal, we really need to tackle the largest contributor to the city's carbon emissions, which is buildings. So to this end, the city has passed a series of decarbonization policies, including the Climate Mobilization Act of 2019, and the CMA, as it's better known, contains 4 different laws. One of those is Local Law 97, which at the time of passing was the first building emissions cap that's set by a municipality across the country. So this law sets emissions limits for buildings 25,000 square feet and above, and essentially creates a carbon budget for buildings that meet that criteria. And on an annual basis, they have to indicate whether or not they exceeded those emissions. So given that, the city has taken a large step in terms of ensuring that they are on track to meet the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And so in support of that goal, they created the New York City Accelerator program to provide free technical assistance to building owners to help them understand how they can play a role in getting us toward our 2050 goal. Next slide, please. So just to give you some additional important context, the Accelerator program was not the first time that the city has offered a similar service in support of new legislation. So looking back to 2012, the city launched the New York City Clean Heat program, and this is really designed to support legislation that phased out the use of heavy heating oils in our buildings. Then in 2013, the city launched the New York City Retrofit Accelerator, which is the predecessor to the New York City Accelerator program. And this was really designed to support legislation that the city had released in terms of requiring buildings of a certain size to benchmark their energy use on an annual basis, as well as to conduct energy audits and implement retro-commissioning of their buildings. So this brings us to today, where the city launched the New York City Accelerator program back in 2019 to support their building performance standards. as I alluded to earlier, Local Law 97 is a key legislative tool that the city has used to ensure that buildings are putting us on track to meet our carbon neutrality targets. And I should flag that ICF has been involved in implementing these programs. So we've been a close partner with the mayor's office and New York City government to ensure that the legislative goals are also met with programming that can help building owners to achieve these goals. Next slide, please. So the accelerator, I think I've provided some high-level overview of it, but in the next slides, I can go into a bit more detail into what the program is and the services that we offer. But at a high level, our tagline is that the accelerator is a city-backed program that helps building stakeholders meet compliance requirements for a wide variety of local laws, as well as to help building owners to achieve energy savings and reduce carbon emissions across all New York City buildings. The ways we achieve this is by providing free technical guidance and free assistance to help buildings identify what upgrades can help them meet emissions limits, as well as what upgrades can help them overall improve their building's performance. We also provide or facilitate access to service providers, financial incentives that are offered either by the state or the local municipality and or the local utilities. And we also facilitate access to financing, such as the New York City Accelerator PACE and other programming that enables buildings to cover the cost of completing those upgrades. Next slide, please. And just to cap the introduction to the accelerator, our mission or overall mission is to mobilize all of New York City's real estate stakeholders, so that's building owners, industry actors, toward a pathway to decarbonization and achieving the Climate Mobilization Act requirements, as well as meeting the city's sustainability goal, which is, as I have been mentioning throughout the presentation, is the overall goal is to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. And our vision is to achieve an accelerated and just transition to carbon neutrality by 2050. Next slide. So just a bit more information on eligibility. Typically, the program works with any privately owned buildings 5,000 square feet and above within the 5 boroughs of New York City. And we distinguish that because the city does have a wide variety of buildings that are city-owned or municipality-owned, and those buildings are not under the purview of our program. We typically work with individual building owners or privately owned buildings throughout the 5 boroughs. In terms of how we work at a high level, once you connect with us, you are assigned a dedicated building account manager who's sort of your initial and continuous point of contact throughout your participation in the program. And this account manager is a specialist that provides objective advice to help you understand what incentives and what resources are available to you as a building owner or as a building property manager and stakeholder. In terms of costs, there's no cost to participating in the program. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, this program is sponsored by or developed by the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. Next slide. So on this slide, I'd like to give you a bit more information in terms of the typical customer journey. So once a participant has learned about the program, they typically connect with us via phone, email, or by signing up on our website. At this point, they would connect with one of our program coordinators who would collect some basic information on the building. So this includes the building address, the typology, affordability status, is it market rate, is it affordable housing, and also the reason for their request for support. So in some cases, it could be a failed boiler, and it's sort of an emergency situation where a building needs immediate support. Or it's in other cases, it's a building that's interested in solar and they'd like to learn more about whether or not it's a good fit for their building. So once this initial conversation happens, our coordinator then matches the participant to an account manager, given their building typology, given their location, and other information that makes one account manager a better fit versus the other. So the account manager would then follow up with the participant, schedule a more detailed call, and this is the building needs assessment. So during this discussion, the account manager will ask a series of questions, in terms of the age of the existing equipment in the building, other comfort issues. Is there overheating, underheating in one area of the building? And this helps us get a better picture of what the concerns are within the building and how we can help. The account manager will then develop a series of next steps, which are in line with what the participant is looking to get out of the process. So we typically map out a series of their concerns and then identify existing programs that can help facilitate the implementation of projects or ECMs, energy conservation measures that would help remedy those situations. The participant would then select the relevant measures they would like to pursue, whether it's lighting, heat pumps, solar, and they would work with their account manager to pursue implementation of those measures. So we typically help them identify or find a contractor. We help them with applications for the relevant incentives. And overall, we remain the objective resource for that building owner or property manager to help them along their journey to identify what the next steps are. And following that, the building participant would implement the measures, and they would, in most cases, remain in touch with the program. So we have a large number of events. We have other engagement opportunities for participants, whether or not they're actively pursuing an ECM. And we found that a lot of the buildings that we work with continue to be engaged with the program through our events and other avenues. Next slide. So this slide, I'd just like to give you some idea of what the program has achieved since 2021. So overall, we've worked with and connected with about 21,000 buildings. And this represents over 1 billion square feet of real estate, and 70% of our resources have been dedicated to affordable housing and priority communities. So a majority of the participants in our program represent or affordable housing buildings. We've also had 10,000 plus buildings that have started construction or have completed energy efficiency measures. We've trained over 2,000 participants, which includes service providers, so contractors, building owners, building operators, and the like. And we've also placed about 100 interns to clean energy jobs within our network. Next slide. And just over the next few slides, I'll just give you some insights or a quick snapshot into some of the tools that we have on our website that are most used by our participants. So the first is the building lookup tool, which is a tool that we developed to give you a snapshot of how your building is operating. So, in terms of using the tool, you would just input any address of a building located within the 5 boroughs, and automatically you would get a high-level snapshot of how the building is performing, which local laws the building is subject to, and additional information that we think is relevant in terms of the energy use and relevant information as it relates to Local Law 97. And next slide. Another resource that's really highly utilized in our website is the incentive program summary. So we've summarized over 40 different incentive programs that are available to buildings within New York City. And we also included information on the IRA incentives that are still evolving and coming online, as well as some financing resources that we've compiled. Next slide. And the last tool that I'll flag is our service provider lookup tool. So in some cases, we're working directly with the buildings, and in other cases, buildings know exactly what project they'd like to pursue, and they just need a contractor to install those measures. So the service provider lookup tool is a good resource where they can filter by the type of project, location, size of their building, affordability status, and get a list of contractors that have been vetted and approved to work in New York City. So it's a great resource, sort of a self-serve resource. But in addition to that, we obviously offer account management services. So if you're not sure which project to pursue, or you need more information in terms of identifying what's relevant for your building, the account management support that we provide is another good avenue. Next slide. Yeah, and that's my presentation. If you'd like to get in touch, the information on the screen is, it covers our website, email, and phone number as well. And we're happy to share these slides at the end of the call in case you have any additional questions or would like more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Everyone, please be sure to share any questions you have for Simon using the Q&A function. Our final speaker is Marty Jostin, Principal Director for Building Decarbonization at New Ecology. Marty joined New Ecology in 2008 and now leads the team delivering building decarbonization services to existing portfolios and buildings. The Decarb team offers strategic planning, all forms of audits, implementation, and operational assistance, and participates in capacity building and workforce development work across the country. Marty, welcome.
Thank you very much, Annika. Hello, everyone. I am a little bit of an odd fit in this webinar in that we do administer one program in Delaware, the Energize Delaware program, but we largely aren't program administrators. We are, I'm sorry, you could advance the slide. We are, technical assistance providers to people that use programs. We use the programs on behalf of our clients. We have offices in Boston. That's where I'm based. We also have offices in Baltimore and Wilmington, Delaware. And as I said, we bring this technical capacity to our clients, both new construction and existing buildings. And we also try very hard to build capacity, which is kind of a key theme in the IRA funding coming out, is that we're really trying to help our clients learn and expand how they can access programs such as these. I was asked to speak to you about how some of the Massachusetts projects we've done, which there are case studies in the playbook. They're actually on page 67, if you want to go there, kind of how we coordinated the work of multiple programs. But I wanted to start with a little bit of history, a little bit of how the infrastructure for coordination that has enabled these projects to access these programs came about. It's really taken a lot of time and hard work. Massachusetts is sort of known for having, being at the top of the heap in the ACEEE ratings and things like that. But it's taken 20 plus years to create what we do here in Mass. So I just wanted to speak to that a little bit. Because this infrastructure doesn't really exist in a lot of other places, and it's really needed elsewhere. And that's part of kind of the capacity building that we are working on. Next slide, please. You can tell my graphic design help is on vacation when I created a slide deck. So this is not a comprehensive list of events or collaborators, but just some key touch points that I wanted to speak to. First is in around 2005, about 20 years ago, we collaborated with TELUS Institute and did a study of what it costs to green affordable housing. And that was really to counter a lot of the pushback out in the market on how hard and impossible energy efficiency work was going to be. Building to green certification standards was going to be impossible. So we really wanted to push back on that rhetoric. Again, this is about 20 years old now, but it was really groundbreaking at the time and really served to open up some minds and some doors, not just in Massachusetts, but elsewhere on this topic. Around the same time, we worked with LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which does have offices in 38 different states. But we did work with them to try to create a CDC initiative, a green CDC initiative. Again, capacity building, trying to work with our clients on exactly what this work was, how they needed to incorporate this thinking into their daily routines, and just kind of raise the concept of energy efficiency more wholly and fully with clients. Around 2009, actually, the kind of the next thing that happened chronologically is that third bullet where we started working on creating a database of housing data. So because no one really knew how these buildings were performing or how they were supposed to be performing. So we started creating this database, launched it as a platform, and with hundreds of buildings. And then we did a lot of work with the affordable housing community in trying to populate that database and continue to populate it. In 2009, we started working with many others in the state on trying to get the multifamily sector more included in the energy efficiency programs. It wasn't quite considered commercial. It wasn't really considered residential, and it was largely left out. So that led to the birth of the LEAN program, which is very well known and very well respected. I think there may even be some representatives of LEAN on here, or of the administrator, ABCD. And that program has expanded. It has standard offerings, very similar to a lot of what you've already heard today, these sort of standard pathway, prescriptive efficiency measures, and it's gone way beyond that to create new pathways as it's learned and as the goals kind of change, right? The goals are more electrification, decarbonization. So they now offer a deep energy retrofit pathway, and they are pushing towards a beginning to add an electrification specific pathway. And then, in 2012, we started securing funding for what's the Mass Green Retrofit Initiative, which is also noted in the playbook. It was intended to serve as this one-stop shop to provide kind of holistic energy management services to property owners. It didn't quite do that because that's a big task. What we did do, and people weren't ready for it. That's the other thing. People were not ready for it. So what it did do was allow us to bring owners through a process with their portfolio and then with buildings. So they started understanding how to think about these topics, how to look at their buildings, look at the data, how their buildings were performing, how to set goals for themselves, and then how to access the LEAN program and bring their buildings through that process. So those were all different examples of collaborations that helped kind of build the marketplace and the infrastructure and the foundation of what's happening in Massachusetts. What we're doing now is we've got funding to continue. We've created a platform, again, in collaboration with LISC and the Massachusetts Association of CDCs, to create a place for people to join, be educated on a regular basis, troubleshoot problems they're having. It has spun off into advocacy group and lobbying groups, and it's become a really powerful voice within the state for what should be happening and what the needs are of this community. Next slide. And just kind of quickly on the three projects that are in the playbook. There are sort of three different kinds of projects. You can see the years, the first bullet of when this work was done. And the first was Atwood Acres. It's about 60 miles northwest of Boston. Project's over a decade old now, and it was served through the Mass Green Energy or Green Retrofit Initiative, that MAGRE program. That was coordinated between LISC and New Ecology. And again, the goal here, like, no one was thinking decarbonization. It was just something you would see in a standard utility program where something comes in the door, they've got a problem, they've got equipment either in an emergency or that just needs to be replaced. And there was no real funding available. So it's like, let's just solve this owner's problem. Let's approach it as big picture as we can, but let's solve their problem with this utility program. The second example here is on Anthem Village. It was really sort of our first attempt to look at a building and think about an overtime approach. We do that a lot these days with the benchmarking ordinances that are in Massachusetts, or the building performance standards in Massachusetts, like local law 97, there's a time frame by which you need to step down your emissions. So people are looking for what are their options? How do they create a plan to be able to do that? So this was the first example of that for us. And we've just built on that. And then Treehouse is the last one. It's about maybe 100 miles west of Boston in a fairly rural community. Pretty progressive development corporation, though, for-profit development corporation that is based in Boston. So this was, they had a full design team on this because they were refinancing. So just a very different kind of project. This is a project that was looking at embodied carbon because that's starting to be raised in Massachusetts and in a lot of the certifications that you have to seek in Massachusetts.
30-second warning, Marty.
Okay, sorry. Last slide. This just shows you a little bit about the kind of the mix of funding that went into these projects, right? The first one on the left was really just this ratepayer funded lien program. I don't want to say just, but that's really how that one was funded. The next one is really a mix of all kinds of, it's going to be a lot of reserves and grant funds. And at some point down the road will be possibly some loan funds. And then Treehouse is a whole nother mix. They had like 5 or 6 loans, 5 or 6 grants, and then of course the tax-free syndication. So the very last point I'm going to try to squeeze in is that there's not a lot of resources out there to develop the scope of work for these buildings. There's a lot of resources to do the work. There's fewer to develop the scopes of work and or even to think about things on a portfolio level to help an owner prioritize. So I think that's an area that a lot of utility programs could step into and help out, because it's beyond kind of a typical utility audit. It's a much different audit that's needed these days. Thanks.
Thank you, Marty. Everyone, please be sure to share any questions you have for Marty using the Q&A function. And a big thank you to all of our speakers. It was great to hear and see some of the R2E2 Playbook program examples come to life. We do highlight over 90 other additional program examples in the Playbook, nested under our recommended best practices. We'll move on to our Q&A, and I'm going to start with a question for Claire. Claire, we had a couple people asking about the commitments that you ask rental property owners to make to keep rents affordable for 5 years. And specifically, there was a question around compliance and how you ensure compliance.
Thanks for the question. I have shared more about this in the Q&A too, if you guys want to look through that. So there's a number of times when the owner needs to fill out and commit to us that they will keep the rents for 5 years in the application process and the intake process. And then most importantly is when we have the completion of what we call the 3-party agreement, which is when the implementation actual work scope is attached to a document that's signed by the owner, the contractor, and Sustain Dane ourselves. So this is a community benefits agreement. This is not a city deed restriction document, right? So we do not have the teeth to go after an owner if they were to raise the rent. We also, though, have been really thoughtful about this process and coming to a place where all of our partners feel confident in how we're running this. When we are looking at the stakeholder communication we had early on, we had a lot of conversations around we need a way for the owners to be committing to this. And then we also need a way for the owners to feel confident to do this work. I'd say there is a range of between $25,000 to probably around $75,000 where we kind of tap out in the grant funding that's happening. So the 5-year amount of time was what was kind of collectively agreed upon, and then the community benefits way of doing it. There's some other factors as well that have led us to some confidence in this method. One is the current rents that we're seeing. The rents are not right up bumping against the HUD levels. A lot of the rents are much lower. Also, the NOAA characteristics, so the neighborhoods where these are located, the other conditions that make this maybe a B or C quality housing location. The upgrades we're doing are oftentimes invisible, right? It's upgrading equipment, it's upgrading the walls. This is not countertops moving to marble and kind of that type of upgrade happening. So all of that together is kind of how we've thought about and outlined this. There is one of our funding sources that did require a income verification for residents. And for that, we use the City of Madison process, which is actually a form that turns that to the owner. So the form is that the owner is signing and committing to the City of Madison that they've done that, which is what we used for that process, and then an annual follow-up. And we do have annual follow-ups with our owners as well, just to check in on how things are going.
Thanks so much, Claire. We had a question in the chat about how many dedicated staff are required to support the NYC Accelerator program. And I think, it's a valid concern. We make a lot of recommendations about adding services, adding in hand-holding. It does take, targeted attention. And I wonder, Simon, if you can comment on how you staff out your program.
Yeah, sure. So I think we have about 22 account managers, full-time equivalent, working on the program today. And I think a lot of the work that we do is built upon the existing laws that New York City has. So we have a lot of data on buildings, even before a building reaches out to us, and we have that conversation in terms of getting more intel or insights into their building. Large buildings in New York are required to benchmark annually, so we have their energy consumption already in our database. Buildings are required to get energy audits and do retro commissioning, so we have a pretty good sense of what buildings need even before we get in contact with them. So the conversation that we're having with them is really just validating some of the data that we have and updating our records. If they did a lighting project before or after they submitted their benchmarking, that's something that would impact the recommendations that we have. So, I think it's a pretty sizable team, and the volume of projects that we're able to work on is only possible given the amount of data that we have on the buildings.
Thanks, Simon. New York City, of course, is also a very large city. So I don't know if maybe once we move on, you could share in the chat maybe how many projects an account manager is working with at one time. That maybe will give folks a feeling for scale. I'm going to ask a question to Marty. So folks who are looking today to form closer relationships with affordable housing stakeholders, as New Ecology has done in Massachusetts, do you have any advice on first steps that you would recommend?
I think it is just identifying who they are, just really understanding who's doing what. In some places, and that's a lot of the first step of what's happening as you're seeing these hubs being created across the country. There's sort of these resources that are being built to help answer that very question, like who's doing what at what level. So I think that's the first thing, is that kind of inventory or landscape analysis and really understanding. And then someone has to kind of take hold and lead it, and or a couple people, and start bringing people together and understanding where there's alignment across these groups in what they do and in what their goals are, and how they can just start the discussion about how they can support one another. It's an interesting, it's a very useful and worthwhile process.
Thanks, Marty. And I know we talk about a landscape analysis in the playbook, so folks can also check out what resources we recommend there. I have a question for Ian. Ian, we received several questions about how all of these programs are funded, and I welcome our speakers to share more in the chat about where their program funding comes from. But I wonder if you could also address how folks can use the R2E2 playbook to learn more about how their programs can leverage different funding and financing sources to retrofit homes.
Definitely, yeah. So We do have a section in section 3, it's chapter 3.3, that focuses specifically on accessing funding sources. So there's a lot of really useful background information on different types of funding, on where to seek out sources of funding. There's also a really extensive additional tool section, which links to some R2E2 specific resources that are already up on our website. And then a lot of other, external resources that can be really helpful in finding federal funding. There's a lot out there that you can use, a lot of tools out there to find out what funding will apply to your particular situation. But I think a good place to start is definitely the Playbook section 3.3. And if you find anything that you have a question about, or there's a granular bit that you're not sure about, feel free to reach out to us at Stay Informed on our website, and we'll get back to you.
Thanks, Ian. I think we have time for one last question. The first section of the playbook is focused on an equitable engagement process. And I wanted to ask kind of all of our speakers today to say more about the role that impacted communities have played in the early stages or ongoing implementation of your programs, of deciding what they would look like, or in influencing how they're running. Or Ian, maybe you, if there's time, could talk to the recommended role that we kind of lay out in the playbook. And I'll open up the floor to whoever would like to jump in.
Sure, yeah. So that's a really critical part of R2E2's perspective, and the playbook. Section 1 outlines a lot of strategies related specifically to that, and just ways to engage community members and give them ownership of the process. So I just direct people, I'll keep it quick, but I direct people to section 1. There's a lot of really great information specifically on community engaging, and also making sure that a community's priorities are centered when you're standing up a program.
Yeah, I could speak very, very quickly on the accelerator. I think so as the program has been operational now for a little bit over 4 years, we've typically had annual symposium where we have different stakeholder groups coming in, and we present out and report out on how the program has performed over the past year and sort of what our key priorities are, and then get feedback from our stakeholder groups, which include nonprofit organizations that work within disadvantaged communities. We include the utilities. We include a number of different stakeholders that we engage, and so it's really good to have that engagement from them to learn what has changed over the past year, and how we can better craft our services to better serve the communities that they represent. So it's been a good reference point to make sure that we're still on track, and that we're moving in the right direction. And really quick, I'd also mention that we do have a steering committee that has a number of these organizations represented. So they do more of the day-to-day in terms of making sure we're aligned in our delivery. But the annual symposium, I think, expands out to a much larger stakeholder group.
And I think that's all that we have time for today. Thank you to all of our presenters for sharing their wisdom with us, and thanks to all our attendees for taking the time to engage with us and with the R2E2 playbook. One final announcement, please mark your calendars for August 20th, when we will host a joint EPA Energy Star and R2E2 workshop that will take a deeper dive into the playbook and into best practices for designing equitable upgrade programs. This will be an interactive 3-hour virtual workshop, so you should come if you want a really deep dive. Next slide. Thank you again to everyone from all the R2E2 partners. Next slide. And a huge thank you to all of R2E2's funders. Thank you, everyone. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.